Hello. So I'm sure you guys all know what animal testing is, but if you don't, it's experimentation done on animals, and it usually causes pain and lasting harm. At the end of the test, they're typically killed. Some animal experiments include injecting or force-feeding animals with potentially harmful substances, exposing animals to radiation, surgically removing their organs or tissues to deliberately cause damage, forcing them to inhale toxic gases, and subjecting them to frightening situations that usually cause depression or anxiety. I'm arguing that animal testing is unnecessary. There are many alternatives to animal testing, and it has also been proven to be unreliable in specific cases. There are many alternatives to animal testing that can be used in place of the cruel tests done on animals, rendering animal testing unnecessary. One alternative includes in vitro. In vitro is where human cells are grown in a system, and this completely mimics the organs in human systems. Another one is tissue models, where human skin is completely replicated. Computer models is another alternative, where they use a quantitative system to estimate the likelihood of a substance to cause harm. There's human volunteers. During human volunteers, they use a microdosing method, and this is where they're administered a extremely small dose, but they're also hooked up to heart monitors, and their blood tests and urine are tested, and then during this they test how the body processes the drug. Specific alternative tests that were accepted and validated to replace animal testing altogether are Epiderm, Episkin, Skin Ethic, the bovine corneal opacity permeability test, and the isolated chicken eye test, and these take place of the eye test and skin corrosion test done on animals. Dr. Elias Cerrone, a physician and biomedical engineer, said, "We have moved away from studying human disease in humans. We all drink the Kool-Aid on that one, me included. The problem is that animal testing hasn't worked, and it's time we stop dancing around the problem. We need to refocus and adapt new methodologies for use in humans to understand disease biology in humans." He's inferring that with our advanced technology, there's no need to continue animal testing. Also, animal testing, humans' bodies are a lot more complex than animals, so animal testing isn't a reliable source. Testing fails when done on animals, and there's specific cases that prove animal testing to be unreliable. The thalidomide disaster happened in the 1950s. Thalidomide was a drug administered to pregnant women for morning sickness, but it ended up causing over 10,000 birth defects and thousands of fetal births worldwide. The affected babies typically suffered from phocomelia, and phocomelia is a disease where limbs don't develop correctly. Extensive animal research failed to predict any of these birth defects, but in vitro testing did prove to predict that birth defects would happen. The birth defects that did happen on animals were only did so because they were administered extremely high doses. The Vioxx disaster was another drug that was administered. This was a pain reliever, but it was taken off the market in 2004 for causing blood clots. In 2001, in vitro tests proved that it would be dangerous. However, animal tests disproved the in vitro test and supported Vioxx's release and continued use because pharmaceutical industries ignored the test done on in vitro. They put it on the market anyways, and 27,000 patients died. Dr. John Pippin, a cardiologist and consultant from PCRM, or a Physician Committee for Responsible Medicine, said, despite having test results from over 8,000 humans, that the drug was killing people, Merck continued to use animal studies to justify selling Vioxx. In conclusion, animal testing is unnecessary. There are many alternatives, and animal testing has also proven to be unreliable in the Vioxx and thalidomide disaster as examples. Therefore, animal testing is unnecessary. Thank
So bad you
Oh, I'm sorry, this is fucking paranoid. Accidentally like gave me a blood clot. Yeah, don't worry.
Super cringy, dude.
But here what we do is also give you blood thinners. So then also if you cut yourself, you'll bleed
I
out
was
from
thinking
the end.
I got it.
So you die either way.
So awkward.
Well, it's like a bunch of like things going on. Because some people are allergic to certain things.
Yeah.
So oftentimes doctors won't even want to buy a separate drug. I'll just
That's
go,
gonna believe it.
take it, and then also give you this other drug, so you don't get sick anymore.
All right, well, let's start in the middle. We'll talk about organizational issues first. I thought you had a pretty good preview. There are only two parts to it, so it shouldn't be that complicated to follow. In the body of the speech, you signposted the first one pretty clearly. The second one doesn't really get the same sort of labeling that goes on, and I think you just kind of dive right into the examples that you have with thalidomide and Vioxx. So those are good illustrations, although the thalidomide one, of course, is more than 50 years old now. The Vioxx one's a little bit more recent. I thought your evidence on that, the best piece of evidence that you had was the last piece of information that suggested that they ignored research on 8,000 humans and used the animal information to justify the release of the Vioxx. Since all of it has to ultimately be tested on humans before it's released for human use, there needs to be an explanation about how that process worked. The FDA is the one who makes the decision on that, and I think you needed a little bit more argument on that, talking about how they ended up relying on the animal information rather than the human information. Let's see. The proposition was clearly identified. I do think that you tried to sneak in a little bit of a value argument as your attention device instead of focusing just on the claim of fact by the description of what the tests are. And all of those things are completely irrelevant to your argument, which is whether or not it's necessary or whether or not it is there are alternatives or if it works. Let's see. The problem I had with the first point is that there is basically no evidence that's cited that suggests that these alternatives work. The one piece of evidence that you have in the middle of the speech from Dr. Cerrone, it's basically kind of a conclusion that says we are in a new age and we've got new things to do, but it doesn't say any of these new things work, that they are effective at doing the things that the animal tests are supposed to do. And I think that's a little bit problematic. You do have some information in the second point about in vitro tests that suggest that those might be appropriate. The other question I think that occurs here is whether or not if any of these techniques are already being used in conjunction with animal research. You made it sound like that's exactly what happened with Vioxx and thalidomide, although you do mention the thalidomide in vitro test. I don't know if that occurred before or after the birth defects. And one quick question, the thalidomide issue, was that a U.S. topic or problem, or was it an international problem? Because my memory of I don't remember it exactly. I mean, I've read about it. My memory of what I read was that it was primarily in Great Britain, and the United States was largely spared from it because of the testing requirements that we had. So I think you maybe need a little bit more information on that point to document the point. Thought the presentation was pretty solid. All right, thank you.